Fran was once a slave. On the day she met her master, she escaped from the slave traders. While running, she was attacked by a monster. At that moment, she wished for power, and her master appeared. A mysterious voice called out to Fran, urging her to pull it free. She turned and saw a sword sticking out of the ground like a lost chopstick, begging to be rescued. Fran grabbed the hilt and started yanking with all her might, exactly when the monster decided to charge at her. The voice urged her to hurry. Just as the monster struck, Fran managed to free the sword and dodge the attack. Energy surged from the weapon, leaving her in awe as power flowed through her body. The sword hyped Fran up like a personal trainer, and together they skewered the monster in one clean strike, dropping it like an overcooked kebab. Looking at the blade, Fran marveled at the strength it gave her. The sword reminded her to be grateful. Fran acknowledged this with sincerity. The story then shifted to 4 years earlier. Fran lived happily with her parents. One morning, she greeted her mother, Flamma, who returned the greeting warmly. Her father, Keenan, stood by the window with his coffee and told her to look outside. Fran was surprised to see the entire city covered in snow. Smiling, her father explained that it had snowed overnight. Excited, Fran could not take her eyes off the sight. Her mother reminded her that winter always brought snow, but Fran insisted it was serious, fearing that enemies might use the snow to hide. She rushed toward the gate, declaring that scouts might already be near. Her mother told her to dress warmly before going out, and her father offered to fetch her coat, but Fran ran outside anyway, insisting she would only stay out for a little while. Watching her, her mother hoped she would not catch a cold, while her father hurried to follow. Outside, Fran enjoyed the snow, refusing the coat her father tried to put on her. Her mother simply smiled at the scene. Later that night, Fran lay in bed with a cold. Her mother, sitting beside her, reminded her that this was why she should have dressed warmly. Her father wondered if they had money to buy medicine. Fran assured them she would recover with sleep and asked them to tell her the usual story. Her father wanted to save it for another time, but Fran pleaded to hear it now. Her mother relented, asking her to sleep afterward. Fran agreed eagerly. Her father explained that all beastmen sought evolution, which could be achieved when certain conditions were met. However, their Black Cat tribe lacked those conditions. 500 years ago, they had been cursed by the gods as punishment for something unknown, and since then, they had lost the ability to evolve. Fran asked what they had done, but her father admitted that no one knew. Her mother added that before the curse, the Black Cat tribe had been strong. Now, they were scorned, enslaved, and mistreated by all races. She insisted that such cruelty was wrong. Fran told her not to push herself. Her mother hugged her tightly and admitted that even her own parents had once despised their existence, hating the world and being told never to show themselves. But they had been saved by someone who was strong, kind, and loved them deeply. Her father said that despite the persecution, they had learned there were still people who supported them. Hearing this, Fran grew excited and declared that for those people, she would live her life to the fullest. Her mother asked what they should aim for, and Fran answered that their goal was to evolve. Smiling, her father assured her that she surely would. Fran promised to train harder, and her mother reminded her not to lose to a cold and to rest early. Fran agreed. Soon after, she fell asleep. Watching her, her father suggested they also rest and promised to train Fran the next day. Her mother refused, pointing out that he was still unwell. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room. The city was under attack, flames spreading everywhere. Fran awoke to chaos as people ran in panic. In front of her, she saw a monster, and shock filled her eyes. A monster suddenly appeared in front of Fran, leaving her in shock. She trembled in surprise and muttered in disbelief, wondering what this terrifying thing was. The monster lunged forward to attack, but before it could strike her, her father rushed in and saved her, asking if she was all right. Her mother came running with worry in her voice, asking if Fran was hurt. Overwhelmed with relief, Fran cried out in excitement, calling for her father and mother. Around them, chaos spread as people were devoured by the monsters. Fran's eyes widened as she questioned what she was witnessing. Victims all around screamed desperately, some begging for help, others crying out and asking why this was happening. Fran and her mother trembled in fear as the crowd erupted in screams. Her father's expression darkened as he realized the truth. It was the anti-magic season, arriving earlier than expected. He warned that this was bad. The monsters were already getting back up. He urged them to run, immediately. Fran froze in amazement and disbelief, unable to fully grasp what was happening, but her father shouted that he would buy them time. He screamed for them to go. Fran cried out, refusing to leave, her voice breaking as she called out for her father again and again. As they ran, Fran begged her mother to turn back. She asked what would happen to her father, but her mother silenced her, telling her to stay quiet or she would bite her tongue. Fran still resisted, but her mother insisted that her father would be fine and that survival was their only focus. An old man nearby shouted in panic, asking Flamaya what had happened to Kinan. Her mother quickly answered that he was still fighting. The old man demanded to know what on earth was happening, but in the middle of the battle, his face turned grim. He recognized it as an anti-magic assault, the worst disaster of all. He muttered in disbelief that it had to strike at a time like this. Fran's mother urged the group to escape through the forest and reach town. If they could make it there, they would somehow manage. She called for everyone to head to the forest together. The old man agreed reluctantly. Their fighting power was lacking, but there was no other choice. He shouted for everyone to break through the forest! Fran's mother commanded her daughter to stay in the middle of the group and to move forward with them. She pushed forward with determination, telling them all to go. Taking up her sword, she fought the monsters fiercely, shouting for the others not to let any of the creatures touch Fran. Fran looked on in excitement, admiring her mother's strength and bravery. The old man cried out that there was no end to the monsters and desperately asked if everyone was safe. Fran's mother assured him they were safe somehow, but then she staggered, letting out a pained cry. Her sword suddenly broke. Voices from the group shouted at them to endure it and keep holding on. Her mother commanded the group to move the injured to the back, gritting her teeth in frustration. Someone shouted in shock that the enemy possessed a weapon destruction skill. Fran gasped in horror at the sight of her mother's broken weapon. She cried out that her mother's sword was destroyed. Fran immediately decided to go find another weapon. She screamed that she would go and grab a sword, but her mother rejected the idea, yelling that swords didn't matter anymore. She ordered Fran to forget about weapons and to run. She demanded that her daughter escape to the forest immediately. A monster growled, lunging forward, but Fran's mother stepped in again. Injured and exhausted, she struck the beast, declaring that she would not allow it to touch Fran. In the midst of the battle, Fran spotted another sword. Her eyes lit up as she shouted that she had found one. She raced toward it, clutching the weapon tightly, her thoughts consumed with hope. She cried out for her mother to wait as she rushed back. But her relief turned into horror when she saw her mother collapsing. Wounded! Fran screamed her name in despair. Her mother looked up weakly, struggling to speak, her body trembling. Fran panicked, calling for her father. At that moment, her father appeared, supporting his wife. He reassured them that he was glad they were both safe. His face hardened with determination as he turned to Fran, telling her not to cry. He instructed her to go alone through the forest and reach the town. Fran's voice trembled with sadness. She insisted that she couldn't go alone. Her mother, barely able to speak, echoed her husband's words. She begged Fran to listen, telling her that she had to go and call for help. Tears streamed down Fran's face as she resisted, but her father reassured her gently, saying it was all right. Both her parents smiled at her with determination. They told her that they could not die until they saw her evolution. Fran's heart clenched as she thought of her evolution. She promised herself she would evolve. Her mother whispered that she was looking forward to seeing her daughter's evolved form. Fran sobbed, calling for her mother. Her father roared with defiance, refusing to die in a place like this. With fiery resolve, he declared that together they would restore the honor of the Black Cat tribe. Fran's heart swelled with determination as she answered that she understood. Her father gave the order for her to go. He pointed ahead, reminding her that the forest was right there. Fran tricked the monster, blocking her path, and sprinted toward the forest. Her father looked on with a gentle smile, proud and relieved. In his heart, he whispered encouragement, believing in her completely. Fran's mother encouraged her, praising her attack and urging her to try harder, to evolve, and to show them that form. Fran called out her mother's name in sorrow, her voice filled with despair. Her father, still fighting against monsters, told her to run. He assured her that her mother would protect him there. Fran worriedly protested, questioning how she could leave them both behind, but her father shouted again, commanding her to go. With heavy reluctance, Fran finally fled, breaking into a desperate run while monsters pursued her. One monster nearly caught her, but Fran leapt away, escaping its grasp. Her body rolled forward, curled up with knees bent and arms closed, tumbling across the ground before springing forward to keep running. Her mother watched her fleeing figure with sadness. Fran kept running, chased by the monsters, trying only to survive. In her thoughts, memories of her parents filled her mind. She cried for them again and again, calling out for her mother and father, begging for help, asking if anyone was there to save her. While running, she saw a group of men in the distance. Believing they would help her, she rushed toward them, pleading for aid. Instead, one man grabbed her by the neck, lifted her up, and mocked her, saying that a black cat was fine, but this one was just a child. Fran kicked in protest, but the man dodged, turning his face aside. With arrogance, he threw her away, laughing that after waiting all this time, getting only one black cat was not even worth a joke. Fran slashed back in anger, clawing the faces of his companions. The man grew enraged, complaining about her attitude despite being a mere black cat. Fran shouted furiously, demanding they not interfere, insisting she had to return to the village, and struck back at them. Their leader ordered his men to capture her. A net was thrown, ensnaring Fran. She resisted, yelling at them to get out of her way, shouting that she had no time to deal with them. The man pinned her down with his foot, commanding her not to struggle, calling her a black cat. Fran demanded to know who they were. She reminded them it was their first meeting and insisted on knowing their identity. The man introduced himself as Taliska, a slave trader. He told her to treat him well for a while, calling her a little black cat, miss. The scene shifted. Fran's father appeared, asking if she had gone to call for help. Fran cried out for her father and mother. Her mother's voice followed, praising her, acknowledging her as their child. But then Fran saw monsters devouring both of her parents. Fear struck her heart before she suddenly realized it was only a dream. She woke, bound to a chair, realizing the grim reality. Taliska sat before her, greeting her with a calm, good morning, calling her little black cat, miss. He remarked on her sweating and asked if she had a bad dream. Fran weakly returned the greeting, then immediately demanded to know where her parents were. Taliska replied coldly that her village had been completely destroyed and that there were no survivors. Fran rejected his claim, insisting it was not true. Taliska explained that he had gone through the trouble of using anti-magic appearance, and that usually a few survivors remained, but this time none had survived. Another man nearby laughed, mocking that her villagers were too weak. Fran shouted that it was a lie, insisting her father and mother were strong. The man laughed again, ridiculing her belief. Suddenly, Taliska stabbed the man in the mouth with a knife, silencing him. He admitted that black cats were not strong, but scolded his men for being vulgar. That included Fran as well. He slapped her across the face. He then grabbed her hair, declaring that she was the only survivor and even she had been caught so easily. He asked her why she thought that was. Fran, filled with rage, threatened to kill him. Taliska responded with brutal violence, punching and slapping her repeatedly. He told her weakness was a sin and that she was far too weak. Fran, bloodied and swollen, protested that she was not weak. Taliska was surprised by her defiance, questioning how she could still say such things after enduring so much, but Fran refused to break. She insisted again that she was not weak, declaring that the black cat tribe was a strong race. Taliska laughed at the idea, mocking black cats who could not even evolve. Fran shouted back, insisting that they could evolve, that she would evolve. Taliska grew intrigued. This was the first time he had heard a black cat say such words. He admitted it was interesting. He accepted the possibility, saying he wanted to see the evolution of a black cat for himself. Perhaps she might actually achieve it, but for now, he reminded her she was still very weak. For that weakness, she would have to be punished. He punched her again while his subordinate trembled in fear at the sight of a child being beaten so mercilessly. Fran's face swelled badly, blood pouring from her wounds. Through the pain, she questioned herself, wondering if she truly was weak. Taliska smirked and confirmed it, saying that for now, she was still weak. As punishment for that weakness, she would become a slave. But he assured her that through this trial, she would overcome it and achieve evolution. He commanded her to aim for evolution, calling her a young black cat. At last, he handed her a paper, instructing her to sign it as the first step into her fate. Fran dreamed of someone kicking her. She woke up in pain, groaning, her whole body aching. Rage filled her as she remembered the man responsible. When she touched her collar in surprise, confusion spread across her face. An old man appeared before her and told her not to bother. Fran was stunned as he explained that she had signed a slave contract. The memory of that moment resurfaced in her mind. That man had told her she was weak, that weakness itself was a sin, and that she must receive punishment for it. Yet he also claimed she would overcome this trial and achieve evolution. While Fran had lain helpless on the cold floor, he had asked her to place her hand on the contract, declaring that they would aim for evolution together. When her hand touched the document, he completed the contract. Fran realized that this was the binding agreement, and soon after, she was abandoned in this place. The old man placed a hand on her head with pity. He explained that the collar around her neck was a slave collar, one that could only disappear if the contractor died or the contract itself was destroyed. Fran, desperate, tried to pull it off, believing she could remove it. The old man panicked, warning her that forcing it would kill her. Shock filled her, but the old man urged her not to despair. He reminded her that she was still young, with a long life ahead. and that survival itself would give her chances. With sadness in her voice, Fran called him old man. At that moment, the contractor appeared again, mocking the scene. He dismissed the old man's words as meaningless and reminded Fran that she was a slave until death. He laughed at the idea of a black cat evolving, ridiculing her. When he saw her defiance, his cruelty surfaced. He kicked her, pressed a cloth over her head, and crushed her spirit, showing her what it meant to live as a slave. As Fran struggled weakly, he only mocked her further, asking why she still resisted. Drawing his sword, he turned toward the old man, declaring him unsalvageable and no longer useful. He ordered him not to move, then struck without mercy, slicing through the collar. The old man screamed in agony, his body burning until nothing but ash remained. The contractor coldly told Fran that this suffering was the burden she must bear. She could never defy him, not for the rest of her life. Before leaving, he stripped her of her name and demanded she learn to live properly as a slave. Fran lay broken on the ground, trapped in grief. The days that followed were filled with torment. She was beaten and insulted by her captors, forced to obey every command. One demanded that she act more friendly. Another scolded her for sleeping too much. Fran's heart cried out that she was not a slave. She clung to the pride of being a black cat, but her body endured daily humiliation. She was thrown down again and again, forced to clean and endure endless abuse. Still, in her heart, she held on to one determination. She would become strong. She would evolve. She would rise. Years passed, and Fran once again stood before the man who had enslaved her. He mocked her as a nameless black cat who could not even be sold. 4 years had gone by, and yet she remained a child. If she had grown more, he said, perhaps she would have been useful. His underling approached, announcing that the unsold slaves would be taken to the Rados kingdom. He ordered Fran to be sent along with them, telling them to sell her for whatever price they could. On that journey, their group was suddenly attacked by bears. Fran and several other girls were being taken away in a horse-drawn carriage. Their hands, legs, and necks were bound tightly with cold steel chains, marking them as captives. Even in that state, Fran's determination remained unshaken. She reminded herself that she was still not a slave because she did not belong to anyone. She wore a collar and endured beatings whenever she failed to sell, but she believed that such treatment would never be enough to break her spirit. As the carriage moved along the forest road, danger suddenly struck. A massive twin-headed bear appeared, blocking the path. Shock filled everyone's faces as they wondered why such a monster had emerged in a place like this. Gasps spread through the captives, and fear overwhelmed them. Screams erupted as the terrifying beast charged from behind, tearing through the rear of the carriage, where Fran and the other girls were confined. Panic spread, and the men driving the carriage whipped the horses harder, forcing them to run at full speed. The carriage rattled violently, pushing farther and farther away from the beast until they finally created some distance. A sigh of relief escaped from the men, and they laughed nervously, claiming they had somehow managed to survive. Even the girls felt a small moment of happiness, thinking the danger had passed, but that relief did not last long. The twin-headed bear reappeared directly in front of them. The men shouted, urging the horses to run faster, yet the exhausted animals could not move any quicker. The beast closed in and attacked again. In desperation, one cunning man seized another and threw him straight toward the monster. The victim cried out in shock, cursing him and demanding to know what he was doing. Before he could escape, the beast seized him and crushed his body without mercy. Everyone watching froze in horror, and fear consumed them. The surviving captives attempted to flee, but several of them were already injured and could not run properly. The same cunning man used mana to cast a spell that froze their bodies in place, leaving them unable to move. A twisted grin formed on his face as he mocked them, declaring that their sacrifice would buy him the time he needed to escape. Then, without hesitation, he turned and ran. The twin-headed bear rampaged, slaughtering the helpless captives one after another. Blood filled the air and death followed wherever the beast moved. Fran struggled desperately, trying to move her body, but every attempt ended in failure. Tears filled her eyes as she saw the monster approaching her. Helpless, she thought to herself that once again everyone around her was dying because she was too weak to protect them. Memories of her parents resurfaced. She recalled her mother and father urging her to run to town and call for help. They had told her she must go and find aid. Yet nothing had changed, and she realized she had failed them again. Sorrow consumed her as she whispered apologies to her parents in her heart. But then something unexpected happened. The beast ignored her for a moment and redirected its attack toward the cunning man, who had abandoned everyone. Fran seized this brief chance and slipped aside. Though she still felt weak, her father's words echoed in her heart. He had told her never to give up, reminding her that she was their daughter and a black cat who carried the duty of restoring their tribe's honor. Strength returned to her heart as she reminded herself that black cats never gave up. She repeated those words inside her mind, forcing herself to stand firm. She wiped away her tears, steadying her breath, and started to run. She told herself she needed a weapon, something to fight with, something to hold in her hand. She believed that if only she had a sword, she could stand against this despair. With that thought burning inside her, Fran pushed forward, determined not to fall again. Fran kept running, her heart desperate for a weapon. She repeated in her mind that if only she had a weapon, then she could fight. It did not have to be a sword, any weapon would do. She needed any kind of weapon in her hands. In that moment, her eyes caught sight of a sword lying ahead. She rushed toward it. But as she drew near, a strange voice echoed in her ears, urging her to pull it out. Fran froze, startled, wondering whose voice it was. The truth was revealed when the sword itself spoke. It asked in surprise if she could hear its voice. Fran was shocked, unable to believe that a sword was talking to her. The weapon explained that she must be surprised, but warned her that the twin-headed bear was approaching and urged her to pull it free quickly. Fran grabbed the hilt and struggled to pull it out. The sword encouraged her to wish for it, reminding her that she needed a weapon. With trembling breath, Fran wished for a weapon and for strength. The sword pushed her further, demanding she wish more strongly. Fran cried out, declaring her need for power. Finally, with all her strength, she pulled the sword free. She paused, marveling at its beauty. But the sword quickly reminded her that this was not the time for admiration. Fran agreed, steadying herself for battle. The sword asked if she could fight. Fran admitted only a little. The sword decided to test her. It examined her status, revealing her details. Name none, age 12. Race, beastman of the Black Cat tribe. Occupation none. Status, slave. Level 3, her life was 19. Magic 10. Strength 9. Agility 16. With skills of swordsmanship, 1. Night vision, dismantling, and sense of direction. The sword judged that she could fight only a little. It then ordered her to focus harder on equipping it. Fran agreed. A system window appeared, declaring that Nameless had been registered as the wielder. Sword skills were now being shared with the wielder, raising swordsmanship from 1 to 7. Nameless acquired multiple titles: Sword Saint, Cooking King, Dismantling King, and Skill Collector. Fran felt her body transform. It no longer felt like her own, yet she could move with newfound strength. With determination, she advanced toward the twin-headed bear. The sword urged her forward. Fran thrust the blade into the bear's chest, piercing deeply and tearing a hole through its body. The beast roared before collapsing lifelessly to the ground. Breathing heavily, Fran looked at the fallen monster and wondered if she had truly become stronger. The sword asked her how it felt, reminding her that she had defeated the beast. Fran admitted that it was thanks to the sword. The blade teased her, demanding gratitude. Fran expressed her thanks. The sword then suggested they leave the place. Fran hesitated and explained that she could not because of the collar around her neck. She revealed that it was a slave collar, a magic tool that prevented her from disobeying commands. Soon after, Teslika's men arrived at the scene. They were shocked when they saw Fran and asked if she had really killed the twin-headed bear. They refused to believe it and demanded she hand over the sword immediately. Fran refused to surrender it. One man shouted angrily and tried to snatch the sword by force, but the weapon struck back, slicing the man's body into 2 halves. The blade declared that no one could harm its benefactor. At that moment, Fran's collar shattered and fell from her neck. Tears welled in Fran's eyes as she realized what had happened. She called the sword amazing. The blade told her she was now free. Then it asked her name. Fran replied that it was gone, taken from her when she was forced under a slave contract. She recalled Teslika's words that she must learn to live the life of a slave. She explained that her name had been erased when she was 8. The sword asked what her original name had been. Fran answered that it was Fran, the name given to her by her father and mother. With that, she and the sword left the place behind. Hours later, Teslika himself arrived with his men at the very same spot. He stepped onto the skull of the dead twin-headed bear and surveyed the scene. He muttered about the terrible mess, calling it a complete massacre. He lamented the huge loss, mourning their precious merchandise. As he scanned the area, he realized Nameless's body was missing. He wondered if the little kitten could have been responsible, but quickly dismissed the thought, laughing at the impossibility. With a smirk, Teslika left the carnage behind. The scene shifted to the beauty of a quiet forest. Deer grazed peacefully on the grass, wandering without care. But the peace did not last. Suddenly, goblins appeared, and Fran stood ready with her newly obtained sword. With swift movements, she cut down their heads one by one, her blade shining as life was taken from them. More goblins surrounded her, tightening the circle. Fran raised her weapon and asked her sword if it was ready. The sword answered with confidence, assuring it was always prepared. Fran continued slashing through goblins, severing heads and splitting bodies apart. Amid the battle, the sword spoke, revealing its truth. It explained that it had once lived in another world. In that world, it had died in an accident, only to reincarnate here as a sword. The reason for its reincarnation remained unknown, and why it became a sword was also a mystery. But despite its form, its soul remained human, granting it the ability to use magic and skills. The sword confessed it could float and move on its own, yet without magic and skills, it was powerless. At best, it could send out telepathy across short distances. It recalled being sealed with its magical energy in a vast plane, until its voice finally reached Fran. Meeting her was not coincidence, but fate. Fran had become both its wielder and its benefactor. If she sought evolution, the sword vowed to be the power that would help her achieve it. While the sword continued speaking, Fran finished off the last of the goblins and declared her determination. She vowed to become stronger, to keep growing, and to evolve. The sword encouraged her, saying they could achieve it together and that it would train her hard. Fran responded with excitement, affirming the bond of master and disciple. The sword hesitated, questioning why she was calling it master. Fran explained that since it lent her strength and trained her, she was the disciple and it was the master. Though surprised, the sword eventually accepted her reasoning. Fran happily declared that, from that moment on, she would always call it master, insisting its name was master. The sword tried to protest the oddity of the name, but admitted it did not dislike it. The system then acknowledged the bond, officially setting the sword's name as master. Almost immediately after, another goblin charged at Fran. She asked her master to teach her how to fight with sword techniques. Master guided her to use triple thrust. Fran listened carefully, executed the move, and killed the goblin in front of her. The sword expressed amazement at her speed and learning. Fran answered that it was only because her master's skills were amazing. Soon after, Fran noticed something unusual, a goblin's magic stone. The sword grew excited, urging her to hurry and give it the stone so it could consume it. Fran gave her master a side glance. The sword, confused, asked why she was looking at it that way. Fran remarked that it was strange to crave something like a magic stone. The sword agreed that it was odd, but explained that by absorbing magic stones, it grew stronger. If it became stronger, then Fran herself became stronger as well. Hearing this, Fran's eyes lit up. She realized that her master's growth meant her own growth too. Fran immediately told her master to eat the stone. She placed it near the blade, but the sword stopped her, telling her it had to be pressed against its cutting edge. Fran quickly corrected herself and followed the instruction. The stone was devoured, and the sword found it delicious. Just then, Fran heard rustling from the bushes. She stopped and pointed in the direction of the noise. The sword asked what was wrong, and Fran explained that something was there. Suspecting more goblins, the sword decided they should handle them since they were heading toward town anyway. Fran and her sword ran forward until they reached the highway. The sword noted that if they continued straight along it, they would arrive at town. Along the way, they noticed a carriage. Goblins had attacked, and a man inside was protecting a woman from the assault. Fran asked if they should help, and the sword replied that they must. As Fran charged, memories surfaced. She thought back to the carriage she had been on recently, when she had been powerless to do anything against an attack. But now, things were different. Now, she was fighting back, and it was thanks to her master. Fran used triple thrust once again, skewering 3 goblins at once. Some goblins panicked and began to flee. Fran observed them running away, and master encouraged her to use the throwing skill to pierce through them. She obeyed, throwing her sword with deadly accuracy and killing the fleeing goblins. The man from the carriage, impressed, stepped forward. He admitted he could not fully express thanks for their help, but offered them a ride. He guessed they were heading toward Alessa town and invited them to join. The sword grew cautious, noting the man seemed suspicious, but for that very reason he might possess useful information. Fran asked what they should do, and the sword whispered instructions. Following the suggestion, Fran told the man that if he wanted them to ride in the carriage and escort him, then the escort fee could be free. The man smiled warmly. He praised her not just as a strong young lady, but as someone far more capable. Introducing himself as Randall, he accepted their escort and asked her to take care of them until they reached Alessa. Fran smiled and agreed. The carriage began moving, but elsewhere another group was also in motion. Taslika and his men were still searching for Fran, cutting down goblins along their path. Taslika expressed frustration that they were not catching up. Perhaps they had wasted too much time fighting monsters, or maybe their carriage was slower than walking. His subordinate tried to dismiss the thought, but Taslika only laughed. He suggested perhaps Fran had cleverly boarded a carriage to move ahead. Either way, he decided they would head toward Alessa as well.